Welcome to the Prophecy Club, where we study and research Bible prophecy. Our topic for this segment is Evolution, Foundation for the Antichrist. We know that the Antichrist is coming, and most of us believe that he's alive these days. But how is it that some man could come in and rule the world for 3.5 years? He has to be standing on a foundation of lies. And we believe part of that foundation is evolution. Our speaker tonight is one of America's best on that topic. He has 15 years service as a science teacher. He has a doctorate in 7 years. He's, for the last 7 years, he's been going across America speaking out about evolution versus creation. And in that time, he's had 27 debates, never having lost one. Been on some 2,000 radio programs. He's booked 2 years in advance to speak. He speaks over 700 times a year. Will you help me welcome Dr. Kent Hovind?
Thank you, brother. All right. Well, it is good to be here this evening. As you mentioned, my name's Kent Hovind, has been for quite a while. I was a high school science teacher 15 years, and now talk about creation, evolution, and dinosaurs. If this is the only session you're getting to see, you've already missed a whole bunch of material. We've talked about in the first couple of sessions, and you can get all my stuff on videotape. We talked about the age of the Earth. You know, the Bible teaches the Earth is only about 6,000 years old. The evolution view says it's billions of years old. Somebody is wrong. And the Bible would indicate that dinosaurs lived with Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. They were just part of the normal creation. And so for the first 1,600 years of human history, things were very different before the flood came. Things were huge. We cover all that on videotape. And number one, about why the people used to live to be 900 and all this kind of thing, and how dinosaurs fit in. But tonight I want to share with you what the theory of evolution has done for the world. There is no question the kids are being taught evolution in the textbooks. That's without question. But what is it doing for the world? And why? And who's behind all this? Is there a smoke-filled room someplace where we can go, find the people that are in charge of this? I think it's much higher than that. There probably are a lot of smoke-filled rooms and conspiracies, no question, but this is Satan versus God. Yeah. Even those folks in those smoke-filled rooms trying to have their little conspiracy, they don't even fully comprehend the real battle and what's going on. The problem is people have rejected God's authority. They don't want God to reign over them. It started with Lucifer in the Garden of Eden. Lucifer, Satan, came to Eve in the Garden of Eden, and he said to the woman, "Yea, hath God said, ye shall not eat of every tree of the garden?" First thing he said was a question in Genesis chapter 3. The second thing he said was, "Ye shall not surely die," calling God a liar. And the third thing Satan said to Eve, he said, "Ye shall be as gods." Satan started this lie that man can become like God. And it's a lie, and that's really evolution in a nutshell. Ye shall be as gods. That's where the whole idea got started. It started with Satan. It didn't start with Charlie Darwin. It started with the devil. Actually, he's the one who wants to be God. Lucifer wants to be God. Isaiah 14, Lucifer said, "I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars. I will sit upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High." See, the devil wants to be God, but the job is not available. So he's all upset about that. And he can't be God. So he's mad at God, but he can't do anything to God. So he's mad at us, because we are made in God's image. See, that's why the devil hates you. You remind him of God. He hates humanity, period. He wants to destroy the human race. Financially, emotionally, physically, spiritually, every way he can, he wants to destroy everything about what God has made. So you have to look at this from a heavenly perspective before you're going to comprehend what on earth is happening. What is going on? Satan said, "I want to be like the Most High." And he started a rebellion against God about 6,000 years ago. And we could trace the history of this long war against God. There's a tremendous book by Henry Morris, a good friend of mine in California, who's the president of the Institute for Creation Research. If you want to get that book, you can call 619-448-0900. Get their catalog from ICR. Great material. Best book on the history of the evolutionary theory that I've seen is that one. But this is really Satan versus God. There have been different groups down through history that have come to the forefront and, you know, taken over for Satan or tried to work with Satan very closely, and there are some today doing the same thing. We could talk about how the Babylonians had an early form of evolution taught, you know, that they thought they were going to become like God. And there have always been people who taught this evolution theory. But it's a philosophy that is destructive. Satan comes and disguises himself like an angel of light. I'm here to help you. Eve, how would you like me to show you how you can become like God? God's hiding something from you, Eve. He knows that if you eat the tree, off that tree, you can become like God. Satan lied to her, and she fell for it. Adam came along and realized what she'd done, and Adam voluntarily became sin to save Eve, just like Christ voluntarily became sin to save us. He knew what he was doing. Adam knew what he was doing. Eve was deceived, it tells us in 1 Timothy. Adam wasn't deceived. But Satan disguises himself like a messenger of light. Hey, I'm here to help you, Eve. I think Satan is using this evolution philosophy to lead millions to hell. Countless millions over the last 6,000 years have gone to hell because Satan has deceived them. See, evolution is not science. It's a philosophy. It's a way of life. The Bible warned us, a way of looking at life. The Bible warned us in Colossians chapter 2 to beware lest any man spoil you through philosophy and vain deceit. You see, what you believe determines how you behave. Your philosophy is extremely important. And there's only two choices. Either there is a God or there isn't. If there is a God, we better find out who he is and what he wants and do what he says. If there is no God, then how do you decide what's right and wrong? Evolution is a philosophy that allows man to psychologically get rid of God where he can become God. He decides if it's right or wrong. You need to be cautious about your philosophy because the evolution philosophy, if you really follow it through and think about it, it changes your whole way of looking at the world. You see, if evolution is true, man is just an animal, right? Just a higher animal, that's all we are. And animals would have the same rights that we do. Animal rights activists, huh? That comes from their philosophy of evolution, folks. If evolution is true, only the strongest have a right to survive. The weakest should be eliminated. Don't you pull the weeds out of your garden? If you believe in evolution, maybe these weaker, inferior humans should be eliminated. Ah, I see where that would lead in a short time. If evolution is true, might makes right. If you're the strongest, you got the right to rule the world. King of the jungle. Inferiors should be eliminated. One of the races of humans must be superior to the rest. Isn't that a normal following or corollary to the evolution theory? Oh, yeah. Protection of the world and the environment is our duty because we have evolved the farthest. We need to save the planet. Flows right from the same philosophy. There are no absolutes about right and wrong. Professors sometimes say that when I do debates at universities. They'll say, there are no absolutes. I say, are you absolutely sure? If there are no absolutes, how can you be so sure? By the way, I tell them, if your brain is nothing but a collection of chemicals that got together by random chance over billions of years, how can you trust your thoughts and your reasoning process? Wow, think about that one. How do we decide what's right and wrong? I spoke at a public school. I get into lots of public schools. I did about 100 last year. I spoke at a public school in Pennsylvania. The auditorium would only hold 300. They had 900 kids, so they brought them in 3 shifts for me. One of the groups came in. A kid sat on the second row, a senior at the high school. He said, Mr. Hovind, I'm an atheist. I said, really? He said, yep, there is no God. I said, well, let me ask you a question, son. Do you know everything? He said, well, no, of course not. I said, well, do you know half of everything? He said, well, no. I said, okay, well, let's pretend that you know half of everything. Is it possible that God exists in the other half you don't know? Brand new thought. I said, by the way, son, if you're an atheist, let me ask you a question. How do you decide what's right and wrong? He said, oh, that's easy. I decide if it's right or wrong. He said, I'm the God of my own universe. I said, boy, I'm glad to hear that, because I'm going to shoot you in 5 minutes. He said, you can't do that. I said, yeah, I can. I'm the God of my own universe. I decided it's fine. How do we decide what's right and wrong? Somebody says, that's wrong. Oh, yeah? Says who? See, America started off with Christian foundations where we had, thus saith the Lord. That's says who. But we've left that, haven't we? Now how do we decide what's right and wrong? We've degenerated into a democracy where we decide right and wrong based on what the majority wants. We started off to be a constitutional republic. Starting off, our foundations were, thus saith the Lord. God decides. You see, the two basic forms of government here, the two basic philosophies of government are evolution and creation. If evolution is true, laws come from man's opinion. And you get your rights from the government. The government decides if you have the right to travel, if you have the right to do this. All of your rights come from the government. But if creation is true, then we have inalienable rights that are endowed by the Creator. Ooh, big difference. It's kids, you tell kids in school, hey, you shouldn't steal. Well, why not? Because God says you shouldn't steal. That's why not. But if there is no God, what are you going to tell them? Because it's not nice. Well, that won't cut it. We've lost a whole generation because of our philosophy we're giving them, folks. Yes. See, America was a constitutional republic when we started because our founding fathers, even though they weren't all Christians, but a lot of them were, Bible-believing Christians. But they had a biblical philosophy. They gave us a republic. When Ben Franklin walked out of the building, one of the ladies said, Mr. Franklin, what kind of government did you give us? He said, a republic, if you can keep it. Republics are hard to keep. We've lost ours, folks. We are not a republic anymore. We have degenerated to a democracy, and the next step is totalitarianism. We're that close to becoming a totally socialistic and then communistic country in America. You watch, it's going to happen real soon. We've become the land of the free and the home of the slave. It's happening. Charles Darwin wrote this book. It's right here. The Origin of Species, 1859. Now, that wasn't the whole title to the book. I'll show you the whole title in just a minute. Back in those days, they had long titles on their book. But they call it The Origin of Species. Now, hold it. What is a species? You know, he never does talk about the origin of species in The Origin of Species. He never does talk about it. The Bible never says they bring forth after their species. The Bible says they bring forth after their kind, right? Now, what is a kind? Well, I would say a wolf and a dog are the same kind of animal. I mean, stand back and look at it. It's not a turtle, okay? A horse and a zebra are the same kind of animal. Now, they may not be the same species, but they're the same kind. And we've never seen an animal bring forth something other than the same kind. Never seen that. But the textbooks talk about the speciation as if this is part of evolution. There was a vocabulary breakdown back in the 1800s when Darwin's book came out. They were looking for the origin of species. God never said anything about that. The origin of their kinds. That's all we've ever seen, is animals bring forth after their kind. Anyway, these may be different species of monkeys, but they're the same kind of animal. And noticing that just because man has classified them as different species does not mean God classified them as different kinds. And it might be that each of these came from a common ancestor. I wouldn't argue about that. But it's still the same kind of animal. That doesn't prove we all came from a rock, does it? Anyway, excuse me. Here's the whole title to Darwin's book. The Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, or the Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life. Ooh, favored races. Charlie, that's not politically correct. Well, back in the 1800s, it was. You see, back in the 1800s, nearly everybody was a racist. A lot of the advanced nations were going to these third world countries to try to colonize them, right? So they could steal their gold and rubies and diamonds for pay the guys a nickel a week, you know, to work for them. You have to understand the climate of the 1800s, particularly the early 1800s, when evolution became popular, before Darwin ever came on the scene. Charlie Darwin's grandpa, Erasmus Darwin, came up with everything Darwin did. Darwin never gave credit to his grandpa, by the way, but I'm sure he stole all the ideas from him. But Charlie Darwin, when his book came out in the mid-1850s, 1859, racism was popular. It was acceptable to be a racist. Today it's unacceptable. Darwin thought natives were just advanced animals. Well, that fits with the times. We had slavery in America in 1859, didn't we? Yeah. Civil War hadn't started yet. They bought and sold them like cows. Matter of fact, they packed them onto ships and brought them over here. They calculated how many they could get on the ship. They estimated that 1/2 of them would die en route to the New World. They chained them to the deck and left them for 2 weeks. I mean, that's where they slept, that's where they ate, that's where they went to the bathroom. They didn't move, chained to the deck for 2 weeks. 1/2 of them died. It's no big deal. Just like cows, throw it away, get a new one. That's the way they thought, folks. What's the matter with these people? Well, the problem is their philosophy. They think these people are inferior, and you always act according to your belief. What you believe is extremely important. But be careful what philosophy you have. Man, if your slave gets out of line, beat him. If he dies, oh well, go buy another one, right? Wasn't that the attitude? That these people are inferior? By the way, that's still the attitude of some groups today in America, like the KKK. I met a fellow from the KKK one time. We got talking about, I had a bus route in an all-black neighborhood, brought kids to church, had a wonderful time. Very friendly folks, get invited in. I mean, 17 years I drove a bus, church bus in a black neighborhood. Great ministry. This fellow from the KKK told me, black people don't have souls. He told me that to my face. I don't know if they all believe that, but that fellow did. Racism was prevalent during the mid-1800s, and when Darwin's book came out, at last, a scientific justification for what we've been doing already. Sold all 1,200 copies in the first day, first printing. There might have been a cover up there. They think maybe one guy arranged to have them all bought so it would look like a runaway bestseller. But anyway, they did sell them all the first day. 1,200 copies. Had to reprint it. Racism was popular. Darwin also thought women were inferior. Charlie Darwin said, "A married man is a poor slave, worse than a Negro." If a professor said that today in your local university, how long would he keep his job? Or his life? And yet Darwin is considered one of the saints, isn't he? He was a racist and a chauvinist. By the way, he finally married his first cousin, Emma Wedgwood. Nobody else would marry him. Would you marry this guy? Strange man. These two folks had an interesting job. Back about the turn of the century back here, between 18 and 1900, Darwin's theory had become very popular. 1859, the book came out, and many people began pushing it and promoting it. Thomas Huxley, and I mean, lots of folks were pushing this evolution theory. And it kind of took over the world in the next 20 years. The world was ready for it anyway. They were looking for a way to get rid of God. There was the right climate when Darwin came along. But Darwin said we should find thousands and millions of missing links. Well, they couldn't find any. So it became very popular to look for missing links. These two folks went to Australia, and they got the Australian Aborigines and said, you know what, that looks like a missing link. Their jaws are bigger. Well, the reason their jaws are bigger is because the Aborigines don't use hardly any tools, and they use their jaws like a vise to clamp down on stuff. When they want to strip the bark off a tree branch, they clamp on it and pull the bark off. You use your jaw muscles a lot like that. The muscle pulls on the bone responds by getting bigger. Any bodybuilder will tell you the more you build your muscles, the bigger the bones get. So the Aborigines have big jaw bones because they use their jaws a lot. That's why. But these guys thought, no, they're a missing link. So they went down to, the whole article's right here, published in Creation magazine, Creation Ex Nihilo. This is the 1992 March to May edition about what happened to the people in Australia, the Aborigines, Darwin's body snatchers. They went down and began robbing the graves of the Aborigines because they could sell the bones as museum displays. Pretty soon they ran out of graves to rob, so they started shooting the Aborigines. They rounded them up and shot them. The police were involved in this. A missionary, a New South Wales missionary, was the horrified witness to the slaughter by mounted police of a group of dozens of Aborigines, men, women, and children. 45 heads were then boiled down and the best 10 skulls packed off for overseas. Here's the article right here. Shot them, cut their heads off, boiled them down, and sold the bones. Why? Well, the Smithsonian was buying a bunch of them. They have 33,000 in their basement right now. You could make big money. If you had a human skull that looked slightly deformed for some reason, man, it'll sell big. They were desperate for evidence for evolution. That's what happened, folks, back about the turn of the century, looking for these missing links. Matter of fact, they got pretty desperate. They took a fellow named Ota Benga away from his wife and family, 2 kids, and put him in a cage with chimpanzees. He was a pygmy from Africa. He was part of an evolution display. Did you know in 1904, in the St. Louis World's Fair, they had pygmies as an evolution display? Go to the St. Louis Zoo. Ask them, hey, where was the pygmy display set up? They'll show you. This was part of the evolution display, 1904. Talk about racism. Oh, yeah. Karl Marx was greatly affected by this theory. Karl Marx developed his theories about the same time Darwin was developing his. But Karl Marx would have been just a little footnote in history. Nobody would have paid any attention to Karl Marx if it hadn't been for Charles Darwin's theory coming along. See, Karl Marx claimed to be a Christian. I don't know if he was or not, but at age 17, he wrote a beautiful paper about how much he loved the Lord. And then Karl Marx went off to college. And in college, a professor turned him away from Christianity. You know, I wonder how many Christian kids have gone off to secular colleges and had their faith destroyed. It seems like every secular college or university has a couple of professors who they think it's their duty in life to ruin Christians, don't they? I remember when I went to college, first day in sociology class, first day, the professor said, are there any Christians in the room? I raised my hand. I was 19, I got saved when I was 16. He said, I looked around, I said, I guess I'm the only one, sir. He said, Mr. Hovind, you a Christian? I said, yes, sir. He said, let me ask you a question. Can God do anything? I said, yes, sir. By the way, that's not true. There are many things God cannot do. He cannot learn. He already knows it all. He said, Mr. Hovind, let me ask you a question. If God can do everything, can God make a rock so big he can't lift it? I said, I don't know, sir, but I know he can make one so big you can't lift it. No problem. You know, they use questions like that to destroy some kid's faith. By the way, I've learned a good answer to that one. Jesus often answered a question with a question, right? Especially a dumb question like that. If somebody asks me that question, can God make a rock so big he can't lift it? I'll ask him this question. I'll say, have you ever had geometry? You ever studied geometry? They typically will say yes. I say, tell me, can you tell me the definition of a line? Yeah. A line goes forever in both directions. Very good. Now, can you tell me the definition of a ray? They'll say, oh, yes. A ray goes forever in one direction. Oh, very good. Now, let me see if I got this straight. A line goes forever in both directions, and a ray goes forever in one direction. All right, let me ask you a question. Which one's longer? You tell me which one's longer, and I'll tell you about the rock. Ah, yeah. But there are professors who think it's their duty in life to destroy every Christian that comes through their class. They're out there, folks. And I don't recommend you send your kid off to a secular university unless you're positive they can handle it, because an awful lot of them don't handle it. Awful lot of them get ruined. Bunches of them. You say, yeah, but if he goes to a Christian college, he won't be able to get a good job. Oh, now we know what's important to you, don't we? George. Oh, Abe. My wife didn't find that one. Now we know, don't we? Money more important? Yeah. Well, Karl Marx got ruined in college. He became a real scoffer, skeptic. Matter of fact, Karl Marx's whole philosophy revolved around this theory of evolution. Karl Marx's book, Das Kapital, he tried to, this is the title page, dedicated to Charles Darwin, from a sincere admirer, Karl Marx. See, Karl Marx knew communism wouldn't make it any place as a philosophy without evolution. You have to get rid of God for communism to work, because communism is the opposite of Christianity in almost every way. Karl Marx knew that. Karl Marx talked about evolution in his speeches, I mean, over and over. His whole philosophy was evolution. Karl Marx later in life said, "My objective in life is to dethrone God and destroy capitalism." Nice guy, huh? He got ruined. You know what really happened? His philosophy changed. The devil wants to destroy your philosophy, the way you look at the world. That's what he wants to destroy. Karl Marx wrote the Communist Manifesto in 1846. Everything is anti-Christian about this. Abolish private property. By the way, that's the real purpose behind the environmental movement. It has nothing to do with saving the environment. They want to abolish private property. They want to make you get a permit for everything. You're going to cut down a tree. You've got to get a permit. Well, you're going to get a permit to mow your grass someday too? Where's this going to stop? Where do rights come from? Huh? Are tree rights equal with human rights? The evolutionist would think so, wouldn't he? After all, we evolved from the trees, right? Man, go hug one, like Al Gore. That's their philosophy. The problem is that they are very consistent in their behavior based upon their faulty philosophy. I can understand why they go hug the trees. It's because they believe in evolution. I like trees. We got a bunch in my yard, and I like trees, and I've planted lots of trees. I don't think you ought to go cut down every tree. But it's a crop like corn or grass. You ought to be able to cut it if you need to. Especially if it's on your property. You see, property rights are very important to God. The Bible has a whole system set up where everybody got some property, and if you were lazy or a dud at managing your stuff and you lost it, you got it back in 50 years. The year of Jubilee, right? Ownership of property is extremely important. Our founding fathers made a tragic mistake. They had a slogan they used: life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. What on earth is that? You know what the original slogan was? Life, liberty, and property. Ah. See, if you own property, you're not a slave. But if you're having to pay rent and you don't own property, you're really a slave to somebody else. I mean, bottom line, you really are. Karl Marx said we need a heavy progressive income tax. Did you know that was Karl Marx's idea? And did you know in America it is voluntary? And 59 million Americans don't volunteer? He said we need to abolish the rights of inheritance, confiscate the property of rebels. Ooh, who decides who's rebellious and against what are they rebellious? Huh? Again, getting rid of the property. A central bank. Karl Marx's idea? Did you know we don't have any money? We have a Federal Reserve note. This is not money. This is a piece of paper. You can't eat it. You can't wear it. And someday this will be wallpaper. Our money's gone, folks. Lawful money is silver and gold. And I've studied all the arguments, and we can get into that for a long time if you'd like. But the Federal Reserve System has totally ruined the American economy. And now they can cause a depression or recession whenever they want. And they use a system called crisis management. Create a crisis so that we can create a solution. You know, the communists wanted to get a military base in Cuba. That's what they wanted. So the communists have a technique called the dialectic. You take 2 steps forward and then 1 step back. And everybody thinks, oh, he changed. Ah, you're 1 step closer. So what they did, they wanted a military base in Cuba. So they brought in a military base and missiles, right? Kennedy said, get them missiles out of there. And they, huffed for a while. Finally, okay, they got the missiles out. They kept the base. That's all they wanted. They've done that all over the world. Step by step, taking over, creeping in. Karl Marx said we need a central bank. Boy, when they got the Federal Reserve System and voted in 1913, the communists rejoiced. They said, this is it, the beginning of the end for America. Because now they can manufacture a depression. 1929 depression was totally manufactured because they wanted a new world order. There have always been folks who want to help Satan get one world control. Satan wants to control the world and wipe out humanity totally. Now these idiots think that they are going to wipe out everybody else, but not themselves. Satan has plans to wipe them out too, but they don't know that. Satan's in charge of all this. They want to reduce the world population to 2 billion by the year 2000 and then to 500 million after that. Well, it's going to be down to 0 when Satan gets done, if he has his way. So what they did, in 1929, they manufactured a depression. A couple of years later, everybody's starving, and they said, wow, what are we going to do? And Roosevelt comes in and says, well, I got a deal for you. Come down and get your Social Security number. Huh? People lined up to get it. By the way, that is totally voluntary. And if you have a Social Security number, you have just entered into a trust. You're part of a trust agreement, and you've got a whole bunch of things you've got to do now. But if you send them a little letter saying, I don't want my Social Security number anymore, you rescind your number, and anybody can do that. Simple. I don't have one. I haven't had a number in 20 years. Don't have a Social Security number? No. Why? Who would want one of them anyway? It's neither social nor is it secure. You say, what's going to happen when you get old? Well, I think the Bible says we're supposed to take care of our own family, aren't we? I don't know. I'm going to provide for myself. If you think you can send your money through your state capital and through Washington and get more back when you're 65, something's wrong with your thinking. Anybody can drop out. Matter of fact, some people have rescinded their Social Security number and then sent letters off and got all the money they've ever paid in back. I don't know if it can always be done, but some people have done that. But it's totally voluntary. Now, if you volunteer, hey, you pay the piper if you're going to dance to the tune. But you might want to get out of that. Anyway, central bank. What they're going to do next time is manufacture a depression, coming real soon probably, collapse the U.S. economy, which can easily be done overnight. And then everybody will line up and say, oh, hey, we're starving. What can we do? They're going to say, you know, we really got a problem. We need to solve this. But there's too many illegal aliens. There's too many bad checks. There's too many, you know, too easy to counterfeit money. Let's give everybody a permanent identification, a little microchip, like this one right here. You ever heard of the little microchip? I've had 4 people tell me in the last 2 months that they saw somebody go to the store in America. 2 of them were in Missouri, 2 were in Arkansas. They saw them go to the store, run everything over the scanner, and then run their hand over the scanner to pay for it. I haven't seen it yet, but I've had 4 people tell me they saw it. A little debit card embedded under the skin, little microchip. The technology is here. Had a guy tell me 2 weeks ago, a friend of his sold his house, and the guy paid him in cash, $30,000. He's driving down the highway, and the policeman pulled him over. He wasn't breaking any laws. Policeman pulled him over and said, why are you carrying so much cash? He said, how do you know I'm carrying cash? He said, oh, that little magnetic strip in there shows up on these guns we've got. We can tell how much cash you've got. You ever seen that little strip in the money? That's the real purpose behind it. Yeah. Interesting, huh? Central bank. Last crisis was to get the Social Security number. Next one's going to be to get the little microchip. And you won't be able to buy or sell without it. Better read Revelation 13 and 14 pretty carefully tonight when you go home. Government ownership of communication and transportation. Do you have to get a driver's license? Yep. Well, I have one, but you don't have to have one. You know, all over the United States, people are giving up, sending their driver's license back in, saying, I don't want this. Because along with this comes responsibilities. And you can get out of the whole thing, if you'd like. See me, I can give you more on that. I don't want to I could chase all of these rabbits down a long trail, but I want to stick with the central theme of how it ties in with evolution, okay? So we're going to try to, don't get me started on this stuff, okay? I'm just going to kick them and keep walking, all right? But believe me, there's a lot to learn out there. Government ownership of factories and agriculture. Ooh. You know, government is so heavily involved in agriculture, these guys are just tied in, inseparable. They had 2 farm agents met one day at the office, and one of them was crying. He said, what are you crying about? He said, my farmer died. They got about 1 farmer apiece for every farm agent. Folks, we're getting socialized in our farming system. Government control of labor. corporate farms, regional planning, government control of education. Karl Marx, why do you want the government to control education? Oh, that's Karl Marx's idea. Now, they had some public schools before that, but most of the people in the 1800s, 90% of the people went to private schools. They were flourishing. And a group of rich, smart folks got together and said, you know, if we're ever going to control America, we must have a public school system. There's a whole article on the table here about why we got a public school system and how it all ties in. You have to have that, folks, so you can teach the kids what you want them to learn. You got to make them good citizens. Not good Christians, good citizens. Certainly not smart people. You want to make them obedient slaves. And the dumber they are, the easier they are to control. Maybe that's why so many high school graduates can't even read their own diploma. Communist rules for revolution. You know, this was kind of accidentally discovered. 1919. Somebody found this, the red rules, how to take over a country. Corrupt the young. Break down the old moral virtues. There are no rights and wrongs. Encourage civil disorders. Soft government attitude toward crime. Well, he's only murdered 4 people. 3 strikes and you're out, you know. How about 1 strike and you're out? Divide the people into hostile groups. Get the people's minds off their government. Focus their attention on athletics. You know, in 1919, there were less than 200 people involved in the Olympics. How many people every year, every 4 years now? Hey, you know, I bet if I said, how many of you in this room can name 5 pro football teams? Most of you could think of 5. If I said, if you can name 5 pro baseball teams, you could think of 5. If I said, if you can name both of your state's senators, probably a lot of you couldn't even name both of your senators. If I said, if you can name who your representative is and what district you're in, half of you wouldn't know. If I said, if you can name your 5 school board members, probably nobody in this room knows the names of your 5 school board members. Maybe 1 or 2 of you. I think our minds are off our government. I think we're more concerned about who throws the ball through the hoop than who buys the textbooks that our kids learn from. Precisely what they want. A fellow in England wrote a letter to his buddy in England. He said, you know, we are going to lose the American colonies because the best-selling books over there in the colonies are books about the Bible, devotional guides. These folks read their Bible. He said the second best-selling books are books about law. These people study the law. We cannot enslave them. He predicted they would lose the American colonies before it happened because the people studied the law. They studied government. We don't know much about the government, do we? We know a lot about the baseball and the football. We don't know much about the government. We deserve to be slaves, folks. We've earned the right. Get control of all the media. That was the plan from a long time ago. There's always been a plan to control the media, and boy, it's been done. You get the managed news if you watch the newspaper, read the newspaper and watch the, you know, the 3 sewer lines, NBC, CBS, and ABC. What you ought to do is clip that sewer line off and just get some alternative media, like some of the shortwave stations or some of the AM radio stations that are out there, some of the Patriot networks and stuff like that, because you're not going to get the real news if you watch the other bunch. I saw a bumper sticker that said, impeach Dan Rather. Oh, yay, that'll work. Anyway, destroy people's faith in their leaders. Of course, it's pretty easy to do with what we got, but... Okay. Cause the registration of all firearms. Why would the communists want to register the firearms? Well, eventually you can confiscate them. You know who's got them. You know, every dictator wants that. Lenin said, we need to disarm the middle class. Stalin said, we need to disarm everybody. Hitler said, we need to disarm everybody. You know, Germany had gun control laws. How's this for a quote? This year will go down in history. For the first time, a civilized nation had full gun registration. Our streets will be safer, our police more efficient, and the world will follow our lead into the future. Adolf Hitler said that in 1935. He took over Germany in 1933, slowly did several key things to make him irresistible as far as you couldn't resist his authority. Nobody had guns unless he wanted you to have a gun. Our founding fathers were pretty shrewd. They knew that if the people fear the government, that's a tyranny. But if the government fears the people, then you can have freedom. So they put in there the Second Amendment, the right to keep and bear arms, so that the government would always fear the people. Not that there's going to be an uprising. Then if there doesn't need to be one, there doesn't need to be one. The government fears the people. Now, some folks have tried to say, well, man, you don't need a machine gun to go duck hunting. Oh, this is not about duck hunting. The Second Amendment is about protecting ourselves from our government if necessary. Suppose the government becomes the bad guy, which I'm afraid they have. Yes. Now what? You say, Brother Hovind, you think you ought to be able to have a machine gun? Oh, yeah. I think everybody ought to have a couple of them. Now, if somebody commits a certain crime, they ought to be executed for their crime. Right. See, the problem is not gun control. The problem is criminal control. Yeah. Guns don't kill people. People kill people. Now, I believe in gun control very strongly. I believe gun control is being able to hold it steady and hit the intended target. That's gun control. I've never shot anybody, and I wouldn't if, unless I had to. But I decided while I was calm, cool, collected, if somebody breaks into my house, I'm going to blow them full of holes. You say, that ain't the Christian thing to do. Oh, yeah, it is. You provide for your own family. I want to provide safety and security for my family. It's already been decided. I'm going to shoot them. And you got to shoot them until the gun's empty, and then say, officer, I feared for my life, and I emptied the gun. And nothing they can do to you, normally. But normally all you need for a defense, I feared for my life, and I emptied the gun. Okay, Nikolai Lenin, the first communist dictator in the 1917 Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, when they took over the Soviet Union, took over Russia, he said, and he knew, he was a communist and an evolutionist, they go together. He said, communists or Marxists have never forgotten that violence will be an inevitable part of the collapse of capitalism. See, if you believe in evolution, the strongest survive, right? I mean, the fastest lion gets the zebra and rips him apart. That's tooth and claw, right? Well, that's what communists think. Man, you have to be ruthless. Hitler wanted to raise a generation of people that had no conscience. Better go back and study what Hitler did. It's incredible. Joseph Stalin believed in evolution, but he didn't always believe in it. Joseph Stalin went to a Catholic school as a kid. While he was in the Catholic, I got the article right here. While Joseph Stalin was in the Catholic school, you ought to get these impact articles from ICR in California, 619-448-0900. They're 10 cents a piece. They've done about 290 of them now, so for 29 bucks you can get all the back issues. Excellent research. Number 172 talks about Stalin's brutal faith. Stalin, while a pupil at the ecclesiastical school, here's the article right here, Comrade Stalin developed a critical mind and revolutionary sentiments. He began to read Darwin and became an atheist. Joseph Stalin had his philosophy changed by this book right here. While Joseph Stalin was the dictator in the Soviet Union, he killed 60 million people. Hitler only killed 6 million. Joseph Stalin signed the executive order to execute the Polish prisoners taken at Katyn. See, when World War I or II broke out, Russia hit Poland from one side, Germany hit them from the other side. Poland, hopelessly trapped. They ferocious resistance and collapsed in 5 days. So they had all these prisoners. They said, Stalin, what should we do with all the Polish officers? He said, they're just Poles. They haven't evolved as far as we have. Execute them. The Russians finally admitted they did that in 1992. I got the article on the yellow poster around here someplace. Finally admitted it. They took 14,700 Polish officers, put hoods over their heads, tied their arms behind their back, jerked them up as hard as they could, and then wrapped the rope around the hood, marched them out, and shot them in the back of the head. You say, Brother Hovind, that's not nice. That's against the Geneva Convention. Well, duh. Don't you understand, though? If you believe in evolution, treaties and conventions are only another means of getting ahead. Because there is no right and wrong. Hey, if a lion makes a treaty with the lamb, should the lamb be excited? Hey, Mr. Lion, you said you wouldn't hurt me. You signed your name right here, ha-ha. What's the lion going to do with that when he's hungry? Communists say, we want peace, peace. Yeah, they want a piece of North Vietnam and then a piece of South Vietnam and a piece of Korea. They want all the pieces, yeah. Their idea of peace is absence of resistance to communism. That's their idea. That's their definition of peace. Absence of resistance. Folks, we got a problem. When communism took over China, 1949 to 1946 to 49, with American help, by the way, they began executing Christians in China because Christians don't fit into these New World Order ideas very good. They executed 10 to 15,000 a month. Under that incredible persecution, the Chinese church grew to 55 million. And the Chinese are over there praying right now, Lord, please send persecution to America because it will strengthen the church so much.
Yes.
And it's coming. It's coming soon. A guy named Pol Pot was the leader of a group called the Khmer Rouge. They ruled Cambodia, 1975 to 79. Ooh, after America pulled out, huh? Yep. While Pol Pot ruled Cambodia, he executed at least a third of his entire population. Some people say it might have been half. Why would you kill half your own people? Well, you see, Pol Pot was a communist and a strong believer in a theory called evolution. And he thought we need to eliminate anybody who doesn't fit in, and we're going to make our society evolve faster. That's from Guinness Book of World Records. Why would they do that? Look, if you got a strong stomach, you ought to check out and watch the movie The Killing Fields. But when you do it, find somebody in your community who is from Cambodia who was there when it happened. Have them watch the movie with you. They will say, this is horrible, but this is not nearly as bad as it really was. It was much worse. We've got people in Pensacola, Cambodians, who are taking English as a second language. My next door neighbor is teaching them. They are the only survivor from their family. Brothers and sisters, mom, dad, aunts, uncles, children, everybody killed. They are the only survivor. You think they'll ever get over that? That's what communism does. Peter Singer said, Christianity is our foe. If animal rights is to succeed, hug a tree, huh? We need to destroy the Judeo-Christian religious tradition. Folks, there's a war going on. It's a war of philosophies. And it boils down to creation versus evolution. God's philosophy versus Satan's philosophy. That's what it all boils down to. Peter Singer believes in evolution. The trees have rights equal to or surpassing the human rights. David Foreman in Earth First said, we must make this an insecure and inhospitable place for capitalists and their projects. We must reclaim the roads, plowed land, halt dam construction, tear down existing dams, free shackled rivers, and return to wilderness millions and tens of millions of acres of presently settled land. All right, David, let's start with your house. Oh, they don't want that. They want to tear down somebody else's house, not theirs. Prince Philip, you ever heard of him? Founder of the World Wildlife Fund, said, if I were reincarnated, I would wish to return to Earth as a killer virus to lower human population levels. You know what his problem is? His problem is his philosophy. He doesn't see things the way God sees them. He sees the world the way the devil sees it. Man is the enemy. Satan hates humanity. Now, Prince Philip is not the enemy, but he does work for him. We need to try to win Prince Philip to the Lord. Any human, regardless of what they do. I mean, Adolf Hitler could have got saved. God can forgive you. But we need to be careful to distinguish who the enemy is, and it's Satan, okay? It's not these people. In order to stabilize world population, we need to eliminate 350,000 people a day, Jacques Cousteau said. Something's wrong with his philosophy. John D. Rockefeller believed in evolution, but he applied it to the business world. And you will not understand the history of the 1800s until you see how the evolution philosophy ties in. These guys that developed their big monopolies, we finally had to get the trust busters and the unions and the child labor laws and all that kind of stuff. It all comes back to a basic philosophy of right and wrong based on, are there absolute rights come from God, or is it the strongest survive? You won't understand what happened with Rockefeller and Carnegie and all those industrial giants until you see how their philosophy was affected by Charles Darwin. Come Go back and read about them with that in mind. See what you think. Theodore Roosevelt was greatly affected by this philosophy of evolution. When Roosevelt was president, he said all sorts of things that really ought to make you sit up and say, wait a minute, what's the matter with this guy? Roosevelt was probably a Christian. I don't know if he was or wasn't, but he probably was. Probably in heaven right now. But Roosevelt had a bad philosophy. He was influenced by Charlie Darwin. Roosevelt said, I wish very much that the wrong people could be prevented entirely from breeding. Who's the wrong people, Teddy? Oh, these inferiors. He thought that the immigrants from Europe, Scotland, Ireland, and the Orient are a threat to American society. How many of you have ancestors from one of them places? Inferior. You ever wonder what happened and why it happened to the Indians in the late 1800s? Why were the white people so cruel and break all their treaties with the Indians? Why? Well, you see, many of our people back in this time, even good godly people, had a bad philosophy. They were influenced by evolution. That's why in 1871, Congress scrapped all treaties with the Indians and moved them off to the reservations. You want to read a story that'll break your heart, you ought to read about the Trail of Tears and see what happened to the Cherokee Nation. They were marched out of their property 2 weeks before harvest time, by the way. So the people who came in and took over their land had crops already ready to go. Chattanooga, Tennessee was named, used to be Ross's Landing or Rossville or something like that, after Chief Ross. Moved all the Indians out, had to give it a new name. Renamed the city so people would forget. Well, I haven't forgotten. 1/3 of the Cherokees died along the way to Oklahoma. The Trail of Tears. Read about that. Why did they do that? Well, you see, if you believe the Indians are inferior, they haven't evolved as far, that's normal. It's natural thinking, isn't it? But if you believe God's Word that says all nations are of one blood, Acts chapter 17, well then, everybody's equal in God's sight. And we're all descended from Adam, right? See, it's a philosophical difference that makes a big difference in how you behave. Your belief determines your behavior. That's why they did to the Indians what they did. You might have heard of Benito Mussolini, dictator from Italy. You know, he believed in evolution. Ooh, big time. And he thought the Italians were superior. They went down to Ethiopia and slaughtered the Ethiopians because they were black. They haven't evolved as far. They're just black people. They went down with their tanks and machine guns and airplanes and fought against the Ethiopians with their shields and spears. There's a slaughter. You might have heard of Adolf Hitler. Family name used to be Schicklgruber, but he couldn't spell that in kindergarten, so they changed it to Hitler. Hitler's philosophy was all messed up because of Darwin and other folks at that time, and the offspring of Darwin, like Nietzsche, who thought the German super race was the one, you know, Superman. Hitler thought about that. Hitler wrote this book, Mein Kampf. You ought to read this book, folks, to see what's this guy thinking. In this book, Hitler talked over, I could show you hundreds of quotes from that book. Hitler talked about nature does not desire the blending of a higher with a lower race. Who's a higher race, Adolf? He talked about the Aryan blood. You ever heard of that, the Aryans? Aryan nation? Still very active today, by the way. Racial crossing. I mean, the whole book is full of racism. I was in New Hampshire preaching up there, and I went to Keene State University to visit their library. They got a great library, a whole bunch of books about Hitler and the Holocaust. I read about a book a month about Hitler and the Holocaust, just to keep my blood boiling. I just read one 4 days ago. Hitler's Cross. Tremendous book by Lutzer from Moody Bible Institute. Erwin Lutzer wrote this. Great book. I went to the library, and they've got a whole section of books, about half as big as this room, on nothing but Hitler and the Holocaust. I asked the librarian, I said, sir, can you answer a question for me about Hitler? He said, well, I'll try. I've studied this for years and years and years. I said, why did Hitler kill the Jews? Why not somebody else? Well, he killed lots of folks, but why did he hate Jews? He said, oh, that's an easy question. Hitler believed in evolution. He had a list he was going on. The Jews were at the bottom of the list. I said, could you show me the list? He said, oh, yeah, sure. It's on the orange poster on the table back there, far right-hand end. Here's Hitler's list. He said the Nordic, the blonde-haired, blue-eyed, were close to pure Aryan. Did you catch that? Blonde hair, blue-eyed, Norwegian. Thank you, thank you. Close to pure Aryan. The Germans, predominantly Aryan. The Mediterraneans, slightly Aryan. Slavics, half Aryan, half ape. This is the list he used. Orientals, you know, Chinese, Japanese, Filipino, slightly ape. Black Africans, predominantly ape. Jewish, close to pure ape.
Why?
Hitler killed the Jews because he believed the Jews hadn't evolved as far. If he'd have killed all the Jews, he made a good start on it, by the way, guess who would have been next? Hitler hated black people. Does anybody know where the Olympics were held in 1936? Berlin, Germany. Guess who won the most gold medals? Jesse Owens, the black American athlete. Hitler was so angry he walked out of the stadium. He said, "This is not fair to make my humans race against this black." Excuse me? That was the Mormon church religion too, or philosophy, by the way, for quite a while, until they discovered the blacks can play basketball for BYU. So the Mormon church is founded on the philosophy of evolution. Ye shall be as gods. If you're a good Mormon, you get to go off and start your own universe someday and be a god. If you're a good Mormon wife, you get to go to heaven and be eternally pregnant, producing spirit babies. My wife don't want to go. Staying right here, forget it. What's the problem with these guys? Hitler, his philosophy was evolution. He slaughtered the Jews. Matter of fact, he offered to send them out first. 1938. He said, "Who wants the Jews? I'll send them to you. I'll give them to you on luxury ships." President Roosevelt refused to take them. Did you know they could have been saved? But nearly every other country except Sweden refused to take them in. What happened? Well, there was a climate of racism about that time. You might want to go back and read the immigration quotas from the 1930s in America. Blonde-haired, blue-eyed, come on in. Jewish, no, sorry. Only a few thousand a year can come in. Folks, it was racism that motivated that. So they began killing them. Just a few at first, and then by the thousands, and then by the millions. You know, they built chambers and gas chambers and concentration camps. I'm telling you, I read a book a month about this, okay? My head's full of this kind of stuff. Suppose somebody in Germany would have gone around speaking in 1937 and said, "Hey, did you know they're building concentration camps out here?" People would have thought they were crazy, wouldn't they? Yeah. Well, guess what, folks? They're building concentration camps in America. Yeah, they are. And I know a lot about that stuff. But I want to give you a different slant to it tonight. So Hitler killed the Jews. They baked them to make grease for their tanks. They shaved the heads to make socks for their submarine crew. Piled up the bodies in great heaps. Ground the bones up for fertilizer for their fields. Why? Well, Hitler's philosophy was wrong. How did he do that? Oh, it's pretty slick. He started with his young people. Hitler's young people. He knew you reached the young, and pretty soon you got the whole world. We'll take a real fast break here, and then we'll cover how he did what he did to Germany, and how they're doing what they're going to do here to America. It's already started, folks. Matter of fact, it's almost too late already. And what should we do about it? We'll see about that in a second.